Trustee Venerable Geshela, Professor Michel Bitbol, and Donald, then Anna Sophie, then the Virginie, and Venerable Tenzin La, Marie,
Welcome.
Maria, Venerable Tenzin La, Trustee Le.
Thank you, Geshela. So we realized that you didn't have a break. Actually, you are teaching a class during the break.
That is actually very good.
So you never stop.
It's very good. It's very refreshing.
Thank you anyway, and thank you so much for this morning. We had a very interesting morning. This morning for us, the first session. So this session is really dedicated to your questions, and we received quite a few questions. So what I'm going to do is I'll read the questions, and some of them are more addressed to either Michel or Geshela, but I think probably on each of them your perspective is interesting. So shall I start asking the question? Is that okay with you?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. So we had a first question for both of you, saying that there is this idea that attention in a way would be a common point between the two methods, emptiness and quantum mechanics. And so the person is asking whether we should teach mindful attention and maybe also scientific reasoning to young children as early as in preschool for these people to be able to, in a way, understand both emptiness and quantum physics. And that's a question for both of you.
Professor Bitbol?
Okay, maybe I just sketch an answer more than do an answer. The idea would be that, so to speak, these two disciplines are disciplines of a real refreshing of the mind, going down to stages of thought which are not too fabricated, not too elaborated, like views of the world, lots of concepts and so on. I think, we understand quantum mechanics when we have really got rid of so many of our prejudice about the external world that was inherited from both classical physics and Platonic and Aristotelian philosophy. So when we do that, I think we go back to a very elementary and therefore very powerful layer of the mind. And I think in Buddhism, it is probably something similar, because really you want to reach the stage of the beginning, the beginner's mind, as some teachers say. And it's very important to do that in both disciplines, I think.
Yes, I agree with Professor Michel Bitbol. Nothing more to say. I fully agree.
Thank you.
Next.
So the next question is from Ludovic, and he's saying, if I understood correctly, emptiness is unfathomable, yet it can be experienced first person or first hand. For this reason, would biology, medicine, or biophysics, where Michel Bitbol comes from, be more appropriate to make the link between science and emptiness? And because emptiness can only be experienced by our wisdom mind in the heart area, I think, shouldn't we investigate in the heart area and its neurons rather than in the brain to understand that experience in a scientific manner? Knowing that the heart area possesses an electromagnetic field that is 5,000 times more powerful than the brain area, I think. So it's, yeah, That's the question.
You want me to?
So we
I
would
think
like
this
to start.
is for Professor Bitbol.
Okay, so this is a difficult question. I think quantum physics has a remarkable feature, is precisely to deconstruct our preconceptions. So it's not capable to make us reach this experience of emptiness, because of course no quantum physicist would ever pretend to do that. Only a good discipline in practice can perhaps help us to do that, but certainly not quantum physics. Now, what about neurobiology or other tracks of biology? I think it's not so obvious either, because we say that there is an experience of emptiness. Now, what is the connection between experience and the brain? This connection is by no means clear in most of the studies of the neurobiology of consciousness. There is a loophole. Neurobiologists can account for plenty of features of our minds, the structures of our minds, the intentionality, the discriminations, the capacity of distinguishing this from that sensations, and so on. But what about the very fact that there is an experience? On that point, I do not see any of the best works in neurobiology that can help us. So there is a discrepancy, I think, between neurobiology and experience. And experience is much deeper than neurobiology, because there is no, there is no account, no neurobiological account of experience, but there is an experience of knowing neurobiology. So experience comes first. Experience is more fundamental, I would say. And therefore, I don't think that neurobiology is really helpful in this domain. Here again, I don't think any abstract study, any experimental study either could clarify these things. We have to practice, I would say, in order to get contact with what we are looking for, instead of thinking of it, abstractly.
What I come to know is that reading Professor, what is that? Michio Kaku's book.
Yeah.
The future of consciousness, future of the consciousness, future of mind. I think future of the mind. His book, Future of Mind, is a beautiful book. It's an amazing book. In fact, Michio Kaku is a professor, the physics. Yeah. And he talked about, in fact, he talked about the consciousness, and he talked about neuroscience. And of course, he got the information from the neuroscientist. And he mentioned about creating, looking for the neural correlates of the mind. Neural correlates of the mind, which means that when you think, what Professor Bitbol said, when you think, what's going on in your brain. So the neuroscientists, they cannot see what you're thinking, but they can see what's going in your brain. Synaptic connections, what kind of neurons are being fired, what kind of the chemical, electrical signals are being transmitted. So these are neuroscientists can see, but they cannot see what's going in your mind. What are you thinking? For example, say you are thinking of being extremely poignant of your mother, extremely, as a feeling moved by the thought of your mother, and you are put in the fMRI scan. Neuroscientists can see what's going, or what is your bodily reaction, the stress, and then the neural firings, the neurotransmitter, the transmission of the neurotransmitters. They can see that, but they cannot figure out what's going in your mind. So what they can see, which you can, what they can see, which you cannot see. You don't see which part of your brain is activated. You have no clue. What kind of, where the neurons are fired, what kind of the transmitters are transmitted from which part of the neuron to the next part. You have no clue. So which the neuroscientists can see, which you cannot see, that is your brain, nervous system. Whereas you have a first-hand experience of, okay, I'm thinking of my mom, and when I was a small child, my mother cuddling me, and you feel extreme, it becomes so emotional. So that is emotional state which neuroscientist does not have any access to. You have that access. So what you have access to, which neuroscientists cannot have access to, that is your mind. This distinction. Because of this, in this book, Michio Kaku's book, The Future of the Mind, there he discussed about the neuroscientists now creating dictionaries of what's going in your brain, which they can see, and then they ask the subject. They ask the subject, what are you thinking? So when this part of the brain is activated, okay, oh, I'm thinking of my mother. Oh, this part of the brain is related to the mother, thinking of the mother. So this is how they're creating dictionary. If the neuroscientists can see your mind, then there's no need for them to make the dictionary. So this is what is actually happening. There's an actual procedure also there. From there, we can see that what Professor Bitbol said is very true, that there's a mind there, and the neurons, the workings of the nervous system, neurons is there. And the one thing that I speculate is that when you calm, of course, there's a brain correlate there. This is what I would say. And then when you meditate emptiness, again, there should be a brain correlate. Only when you go through extremely deep meditative state of emptiness, which we cannot really say who has that experience, who doesn't have that experience. We have no clue. But the point is that when someone is really, really deep in a meditative state, to the extent of seeing emptiness directly, at that point, it says that all your the sensory consciousness shuts down. At that point, what happens to the brain, I'm not too sure. Otherwise, for the more ordinary people having some experience of emptiness, when they meditate, they could feel the bodily reactions happening. I'm very sure that there's a brain correlate there. So this brain correlate, what is that like? What is that like? As of now, although there are some research being done on this, people meditate on emptiness, and then the neuroscientists, they check on the brain scan, but I'm not too sure how accurate are these. In the first place, the subject, the person who should be meditating emptiness, to what extent the person actually understands the emptiness. This is a big question. Then number two, how accurate is the measure? But still, it is very important that these steps should be taken. In case later on, if we get a very good subject whose knowledge of the understanding, experience of emptiness is undoubtedly accepted unanimously by all the big scholars and the meditators, and then the neuroscience also developed to such a height, and then when they see that, I would say that there's bound to be, say, the person meditating on emptiness, and then the person first-hand report that I'm now meditating on emptiness, and then you see what the brain is like, what's happening on the brain level. And then when the person says, I'm meditating on impermanence, verbally you report it, and then the neuroscientists again check if they could see the nuances in the difference. And meditation emptiness, meditation on impermanence. Within emptiness, I give you the list of 5. With each of these 5, if the neuroscientists can see the difference on the level of the brain, then we can say that, okay, when this part of the brain is activated, or when this, whatever, beta, gamma, theta, whatever brainwave operates on this particular level, then this person has experienced emptiness. So only through various steps. I think it'll take time, but we should not give up. This is a brilliant question, but it'll take time. Thank you.
Thank you. So then we have a question from Yamit, and he says that if he understands well, from the point of view of Buddhism, macrophysics and microphysics would both fall under conventional reality, but from the perspective of physics, both of them would be ultimate reality. So can you please make some remarks about that? So I think that's also for both of you, yeah.
Oh, yeah, well, why not? Yes, it's true. I would agree with the idea that from the standpoint of Buddhism, both categories of physical theories, both classical and quantum theory, fall under the category of conventional truth. But are physicists all convinced that their theories are finally disclosing something of an absolute reality? I think it depends on their philosophy of knowledge, on their epistemology, as we say. Namely, there are people who claim to be realists, scientific realists, and who say, therefore, the symbols and the formalism of any physical theory tend to describe things as they are. And there is also a famous argument which was given by Hilary Putnam in favor of this option. He says, if it were not the case, if physical theories did not describe the world as it is, then their success in technology would be a miracle. I think this is not conclusive because, you know, the success of, for instance, living beings is not determined by their having a copy of the external world in them. For instance, living beings are capable of having great success in adaptation to their environment without having a complete copy of this environment in them. It suffices that their behavior is adapted to the interaction between them and the environment that emerges precisely out of this interaction. And I think in science, it's exactly the same, namely that science is not a copy, a representation, a mirror-like image of the external world, but it is, as for instance, Christopher Fuchs would say, it's a user's manual, namely a guide to cope with the reactions of our environment to our actions. And in that case, even physicists would accept that physical theories are part of what we could call a conventional reality, namely just a conventional truth. A truth which is necessary to act, to practice successfully, but not to disclose anything of a putative nature of reality independently of us. I say putative because maybe there is none. Maybe it's just nonsensical to look for such a reality independent of us. Maybe, you know, I remember a remark of Christopher Fuchs and Asher Perez. They said, maybe reality is such that it prohibits us to find an image of it as if it were independent of us. So it's a sort of wonderful circle here.
And in this connection, I would say that to this question, macro and the micro, whether both fall under conventional truth. So here in the very standard Buddhist text, you don't find these words like macro, micro, and so forth. So in fact, I try to convey these Buddhist concepts in the scientific language. And now the precise answer is that the micro referring to subtle. So this word subtle is used in the standard Buddhist text, and the macro meaning the gross world. So these things are what you find there in Buddhist concepts. And then subtle, more precisely subtle in this context, subtle in terms of the ultimate reality. That of course falls under the ultimate truth. whereas the gross, referring to the gross world, where we see the rules, regulations of the world, traffic rules, and so forth. These all fall in the category of the conventional truth. Yeah.
So the next question is from Isabel, and she's starting from the poison arrow parable, but she's saying that when someone is cured, one might want to know where the arrow comes from and why. And in the same way, why can't we have an explanation about why our mind suffers since beginningless time? Or to phrase it like Michel Bitbol, couldn't we have a worldview rather than only a critique of the worldview?
I think I can answer to this question, because of course it's interesting. You could say, like, you know, the skeptical thinker I quoted, that, okay, maybe we cannot know what things are in themselves, but this doesn't mean that there is no reality as it is in itself. This is a weak reading of the critique of views, just because we are presently unable to go further. But you know, quantum mechanics is precisely that theory that showed that any possible attempt at reconstituting a view of the world as if it were independent from the modes of access of it is doomed either to failure or to paradoxes. Whereas when you just relinquish this idea that there is something to be known beyond the rules of good behavior in order to get successes in our practices, then you are suddenly freed of any paradox. And this is a very strong sign, maybe not a proof, but a very strong sign that maybe there is no meaning, that it is meaningless to look for an ultimate explanation in terms of so-called mechanisms. Mechanisms are either absent or paradoxical in quantum physics. So maybe we have to get used to remain with the doctor who cures the arrow and not look for a metaphysician who would elucidate the origin of everything, including the arrow.
Okay, I think that this question is extremely important. This is very important. Why I'm addressing this is for the reason that many people can misinterpret what the parable which Professor Michel Bitbol brought up in his lecture about the arrow, the poisonous arrow being shot, and then would you take out the arrow, or you keep asking where the arrow came from. First, you have to save the person. So here, this can lead to various misconceptions, saying that we have to free ourselves from suffering and don't inquire where your suffering comes from and what is the nature of the suffering, what's the nature of the cause of suffering, what are the causes of suffering. Don't inquire these. This is not the connotation. So if I were to explain what this is like, I would for sure, I'll be very sure that you would agree with me that if you say that, let's say, for example, say the arrow being shot, likewise we are suffering, and now our job is to remove our suffering. And for the removal of suffering, if you say that, okay, this was the root of suffering, ignorance, the Buddha taught that the root of suffering is ignorance. And in which text it is said, in his Perfection Wisdom Sutra, it is in the Four Noble Truths, teaching of Four Noble Truths is taught there. And this teaching, how can you prove that it is this teaching is it oral or is written, right? Written means, where is it written, in the palm tree or palm leaf or in a proper leaf? These are totally irrelevant. Palm leaf, whether it's written on the palm leaf or whether it's written on the paper, it doesn't matter. So these treasures, the real knowledge, that the suffering comes from the ignorance. So for example, in more detail, Arya Nagarjuna taught that the ceasing of karmas and afflictions is nirvana. Nirvana meaning liberation from suffering. This arises from the contaminant karmas, which in turn arise from the afflictions. And these two karmas and afflictions arise from inappropriate attention, which in turn arises from the elaboration of self-grasping ignorance. It is through seeing the emptiness that the elaborations can be seized. So all the process, how to reverse the suffering, is taught in great detail. So therefore, it is not that we are not to explore where the suffering comes from. This is not the meaning. The meaning is very different. So let me say that suffering comes from our inappropriate. The suffering comes from our contaminant karmas, which in turn arises from afflictions, which in turn arises from inappropriate attention, which in turn arises from the self-grasping ignorance. So this we have to study, we have to explore, we have to meditate on this. Whereas, this teaching, Arya Nagarjuna, where did he write? It's on a piece of paper, or paper made in India or made in Japan or in France. This is totally irrelevant. These are say, like checking arrow shot from where, or they say, what is the quality of the arrow? Who made the arrow? And who's the brother, who's the father of the person who made the arrow? So there are some questions which are extremely important. There are some questions which are irrelevant. So those irrelevant questions, just forget and extract what is meaningful for your actual liberation. This is the meaning. So therefore, it is the question one who, the Isabel, what she asks is that why can't we have an explanation about our own mind suffers since because this is perfectly what is required. This is not rejected by this parable. So we have to explore how our mind suffers and what are the causes and how to undo the causes. All these have to be studied, reflected, and meditated upon. Is very important. So we should not. Some people simply they don't want to study extensive teachings of the Buddha, so they just they just take this story and they look for excuses. Whereas how the Professor Bitbol, how he brought this parable, this is so important for us to be wise enough to see what is to be studied, reflected, meditated upon, and what is to be discarded. We need to have that intelligence, so which Professor Bitbol said, and also about this one. The second part is very important. The questioner said, to phrase it like Michel Bitbol, couldn't we have a world view rather than only a critique of the world view? Okay, this is very important. Arya Nagarjuna if you study Arya Nagarjuna's text, which the Professor Bitbol oftentimes cited, Mula Madhyamika Karika, the fundamental wisdom of the middle way. So there you see that mainly Arya Nagarjuna kept rejecting. There through the tetralema, the four rejections. But it is not that Arya Nagarjuna come from the point of view of positing the world. He does. If you read his book, the Letter to a Friend, this is a book. If you read this, you see that he taught the king. He was advising the king how to rule the country, how to rule the kingdom very effectively, how to take care of the sentient beings, how to take care of your subjects, and how to plant trees on the roadsides for people to get shade when they walk, because that in those days no cars, nothing. They have to walk in hot season. There should be trees, and how to administer. All these were being taught, because if seeing that if he does not teach these things to the king, then the king may do something in the wrong way. So in the world, there's something wrong, there's something right. So in order to stop the wrong actions, the Nagarjuna taught the right actions. You have to do this, do that. These things should be done. So therefore, the thing is that there are two things. So if you could remember in my talk, one side is emptiness and the other side is conventional truth, the dependent origination. Seeing emptiness, we see that we require two things. We see our goal twofold. Number one is to remove our fears of life. Number two, to expand our joys too. So of the two, primarily, when we see the emptiness side, it removes our attention, stress, anxiety, and so forth. Because all the anxiety, stress, and so forth, the underground or the ground on which these anxiety, stress, they're built up, that is a self-grasping ignorance. So with the wisdom of emptiness, this ignorance is removed, like the iceberg. When iceberg melts, everything what is stacked on the iceberg, for example, like say in the Arctic Circle or the Antarctica. So there, the icebergs, they existed for the last like almost 4 billion years. 4 billion years. So just recently, because of the global warming, then icebergs start to melt. So people in those days on the icebergs, they built the igloo the house. And if the people then, they are more creative, they could have built 10-story buildings of the ice. Once the iceberg melts, all what you stacked on top of that will melt. Likewise, when self-grasping ignorance melts, seeing the emptiness, self-grasping iceberg of self-grasping ignorance melts. With this, all your inappropriate attention, afflictions, contaminant karmas, then all the misery, stress, anxiety, they all dissolve. Then seeing the emptiness, seeing the dependent origination or the conventional truth and the dependent origination, then your compassion grows because that you want joy to multiply. So it's not just the mitigating or subduing your fear, anxiety, and so forth, but to expand your joy, to multiply your joy, your compassion should spread. For the compassion, you need a lot of skillfulness and all these the practices like generosity, ethical discipline, patience, enthusiasm. All these practices should be enhanced. For that, we need to know the dependent origination. Not only that we keep rejecting, we also establish things. So two things should go parallel. And the Mula Madhya Karika, that text primarily focuses on rejecting things. And then in the other sources like Ratnavali, which again Professor Bitbol cited, and then the letter to friend by Nagarjuna, there he explained how to posit things, not only reject. Thank you.
Thank you, Geshela. There is actually another question which is related to what you just commented upon, and it's a question from Catherine. She said she wrote down that the flower is empty from the side of the object, and if one understands that, one has goosebumps. Seeing emptiness affects our emotions. The mental afflictions are pacified, but subjectively the flower exists, and then the feelings vanish. So that's what she wrote. She's not sure about the word vanish, and she's not sure to understand. So she's asking if you can clarify and elaborate on this, which you might have done a little bit already, but if you could maybe address that question, Geshela.
Okay, Catherine, thank you so much. This question is so good. So good. So this is more the experiential. It doesn't mean that I have the experience. I don't have experience. It is more experiential. So it is you who should be doing this. Let's say if you're so attached to, let's say, cheesecake, or let's say that you're so attached to your husband, to your wife, to your son, to your daughter, to your house, to your car, to your iPhone 14, and so forth. Now iPhone 15, right? I don't know whether it's 15 is available. So say, if you're so attached to any of these objects, then see the emptiness of this, see to your, just not the cognitive aspect of the mind, also look at your physiological reaction, the bodily physiological reaction to the experience. When you see that object that I'm so attached to is actually empty of intrinsic reality. See to the experience. And then next, say although the object, let's say your husband, your wife, your son, daughter, mobile, car, house, whatever. Although that is objectively not there, but it exists subjectively. Just bring that experience, the two sides, one after the other. And then when you see the functionality of the world, functionality of your car, house, and so forth, what is a physiological reaction within you? These two, of course, these two are related. They're very closely connected. It's pure experiential. So you are the best person. And for that, you have to, it's not that, okay, now I'll go back to my house and I'll check what is the experience like. No, first you have to study, reflect, and meditate on emptiness. You must get a good experience of emptiness. Once you get a very good experience of emptiness, it'll take time, it'll take years. With this, but even though it may take the number of years, but it's worth it to invest your time on this, because this is the ultimate, I would say, a great meaning of your life. Many of my friends who are doing the Nalanda Master's course from Tibet House say after meeting with this course, they study this, then they say that, okay, now I see a meaning, purpose of my life. Thus far, it was just like getting more money, getting a bigger house, and so forth, which actually does not really give me happiness. Now I can see that there's a bigger purpose of my life, that even if I don't have big house, big cars, and so forth, still I can keep my sanity of my mind. So earlier, you have your husband, you have your wife, so forth, and then gradually you become older, you are separate from your husband, wife, and so forth. Then you see that your life is so hollow, and now you realize that no, life is not hollow. Even though you are away from you are separate from your husband, you are separate from your wife, from your children, so forth. Physically, people may see that you are lonely, but you're not lonely. You feel that there's so much meaning to your life, more meaningful than when you were in your family, engrossed in your family businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Geshela. And then we have a question from Sylvie Precias. When one says that the flower does not exist objectively, is it because it is made of a stem, leaves, and petals, and therefore dependent on these objects? Or is it because it is made of atoms that we can only perceive through chemical reactions? So I think the question could go to both of you.
Which question is that?
So that's a question from Sylvie. It's probably the fourth one under your question. I exchanged two questions in the list. So it's just before the one you answered, Geshela.
Professor Bitbol, you give the answer?
I think well, I can try to give a very short answer, but you know, there is a sense of emptiness which fits with the second part of the question, namely, you know, maybe you remember Arthur Eddington's image of the two tables. He said the table of apparent perception is a table which is full, which is massive, which resists pressure and so on. But the table of physics is made of a myriad of atoms separated by a huge space of a huge empty space. And you know, so it's emptiness, but in the usual physical sense, namely absence of something substantial somewhere. And in this case, indeed, you could say the table is empty because it doesn't have so much matter in it. And the appearance of density, solidity, and so on is just due to the properties of these few atoms, nucleuses, and electrons that are in the table. Okay, so this is, I think, a first level of answer, which is not too bad, but probably doesn't go to the end of the matter. The second level of answer is to say, okay, even these, few atoms, electrons, nucleus, and so on, are themselves empty of own being. Namely, they are not, they don't have properties such as resistance or even repulsion or attraction. All these things are not intrinsic. They come as a reaction to an action. They are also mutually dependent. So in this sense, you could say, okay, there is something even deeper in the emptiness of some material stuff, which is the emptiness of inherent nature. So here is a sketch of an answer.
Okay. Again, this is a good question. We are lucky that we are getting many good questions.
Yeah.
It's about say, how does one see the emptiness? Is it just by going in atoms and see that the flower is not there? Okay, for this matter, I would say that in my presentation, I give the list of 5 levels of emptiness. Though, if you just look at them very in a cursory form, in very gross form, we see that they're very similar, but they're not similar. They differ starkly. They differ greatly in terms of this subtlety. There's a big difference there. The basic trend is very similar. How you get there to emptiness seems very similar, but only when you study them separately, in more detail, then you'll come to realize that they are not same, and it's not just a symbol. Otherwise, we say that the flower is made of billions of atoms. For example, I think, say, if you are 70 kg, if your weight is 70 kg, then you are made of I think about what, 70 into 10 to the raise of power 23 the atoms. So this is number of the atoms that you are made of. And then atoms, where is there, say on that on the atomic level, where is this person? The person's not there. So this seems very simple. It's not that it's not difficult at all. It's very simple to say that none of the atoms is a person. So the person is not there. That sounds very simple. For this, I would say that although the analysis done is by Sylvie here, when one says that a flower does not exist objectively, it is because made of stems, leaves, and petals, and so forth. So the analysis is like this. Before this, there's one is known as ultimate analysis and conventional analysis. You have to make this distinction. Ultimate analysis and conventional analysis, we have to know this. And then meanwhile, by engaging in these analysis, see if something that appears to you, like look at the flower, and something appears to you very naturally. And by reflecting on this, study, reflection, meditation, meditate on this, what I'm seeing something from the object, it is not there. If that comes to you, it is not emptiness, but it is going towards emptiness. What I'm seeing is deceptive, it's not really there. If that comes to you, you are getting towards the direction of emptiness. And later on, when you see, what I'm seeing is totally deceptive, it is not there. But things still function infallibly. Things still function very precisely, accurately, without any error. Say 200 plus 3 equals 203, not 203-ish, right? There's a very precise precision is there on the functional level. There's a precision there, while objectively nothing is really there. What I'm seeing is a deceptive. It's all coming from the part of the projection. In other words, when you see the harmony of emptiness and the functionality of the world, at that point, you understand emptiness is closer towards the good understanding. Otherwise, look at this flower, it's deceptive. Where's the flower is empty. If this is your understanding, it falls more into nihilism. we should be very careful. And yes, finally, we see that say for somebody, for all of us, we all have some degree of the fears, anxiety, stress, and so forth. And even from the point of view of this life, just this life, when you are very anxietic, say the meditation emptiness, it will greatly help us. Even though you understand emptiness may not be complete, it doesn't matter. Study properly with the help of a good teacher. Good teacher meaning somebody who has really studied this emptiness in a very systematic way, where you don't fall under nihilism, you don't fall under absolutism. You go into the middle way where you're able to posit the functionality of the world, at the same time see that what I'm seeing is deceptive. So these two you are seen as converging in harmony. This will greatly help us to relieve us of our stressful emotions. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we have a question from Stefan, and he's asking, what is the governing principle that governs us and everything around us? For Buddhists, it is the nature of mind. For others, for others, things are created by a God who is external but not separated from us. The existence of such God is refuted by the Buddha, if I understand correctly. And he's adding, I'm not sure whether that question is relevant, and I don't forget the arrow parable. But yes, yet still he has this question about the governing principle.
Okay, Professor Bitbol.
Okay, yes, let me try. We have a basic mental structure in which we want to find a foundation. We want to find a principle. And this is a very old idea. It dates back, I think, to the time of the Greeks in the West, namely that the Greeks, the first Greek philosophers wanted to point to what they called a principle. In Greek, an arche, like archaeology, arche, principle. For instance, for Thales, it was water. For Anaximander, it can be the boundless. For others, it can be air, something out of which everything is made. Then there was, people like Aristotle, who said, okay, when you have an effect, you must have a cause. And then the cause must have also a cause in turn, and so on and so on. And since he said one cannot go to infinite with that, then there must be a first cause. And then, when Christianity came, many Christian thinkers identified Aristotle's first cause with a creator, a God. The difference is that first cause can be a neutral principle, a non-willing principle, whereas God is a person in Christianity and other religions. God is a person, so he has a will. So here there is the idea that the principle becomes like a person with a will, with a power. But then came further philosophers in the West, such as Spinoza. And Spinoza said, okay, we must have a first cause, and Aristotle is right, and the religions are also right that this cause should be called God. But then, when he had to define God, he said God is just causa sui in Latin. That means a self-causing principle, because in order to stop this regression of causes and effects, you have to imagine a cause which is its own cause. So he defined God as an entity with the capacity of being its own cause. But you see that, to me, all these things are speculations, and they, in fact, they assume that it is absolutely necessary to have a first step in everything. Maybe there is none. Maybe there is pure self-referential loops. For instance, Francisco Varela very much insisted on the possibility that not only living beings, but the world be what he called autopoietic, namely exactly like Spinoza's God, cause of itself by a self-referential loop. So you see, there are so many possibilities of thought, and at this moment, there is no one of these possibilities of thought which can claim certainty or even likeliness, you know. So maybe it's exactly one of the points on which the Buddha was a little bit diffident when he denounced the necessity of finding the origin of the arrow, the one who made it, and so on. He was also pointing towards the metaphysical speculations about the beginning or the beginninglessness of the world.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Michel. This is the extremely good. In fact, my thoughts is very much in line with Professor Michel's thought. So basically, it's about yes. If you look at in the West, what Professor Michel explained, in India, brilliant thoughts evolved from different places at different times, and the principle was the governing principle. So there, in other words, how this world came into existence, what makes this world operate, and some thinkers in India said that it's just a physical matter. The particles, they are the ultimate, the building blocks of the world. And then they come into particular order, and this is how all these things came into existence. There's nothing, no God, there's nothing. And some say that it's the time. Yes, of course, the time is the one which creates the universe. Some say that there is some external agent there, known as Prakriti, the chief generality, the main, which decides things for us. So all these different thoughts came into existence, with the question on how this came into existence. So where Aristotle talked about, so what's the beginning? There should be some beginning there. There should be some beginning there. And the moment you posit the beginning, the question is that this beginning, say, you track back the cause, effect, then you finally identify this is the final thing. So who created this? There should be some agent there to stop the infinite regress. Some agent there. So that then people start elaborating. In fact, I was very fascinated. I was in my 20s. I must be 21 or 22 years old when I got hold of one book. The title of the book, I don't remember the author of the book. It's a fat book. And the title of the book is The Rise of Civilizations. It's an amazing book. And I just read it, and I personally, I'm more skeptical person. I don't really agree many things. I'm very skeptical in my nature. And I read this book, and it really gives me such a joy. Wow, this is how all these different religions came into existence. Somebody said something, the next person elaborated on this, third person elaborated on this, keep elaborating, and then concretizing the idea. Then nobody is able to touch it. If you touch it, blasphemy, you are finished. So everybody's scared. So actually created from a small concept by one person, then developed by a second person, and then they put into writing. It becomes very solidified. If you do something beyond what is said there, you're done. So therefore, this is how the religions came into existence. This was written there, and I very much agreed with what was said there. I very much agreed with what is in this book. It's amazing. So with this, what I'd like to share with you is that this is very important. In Buddhism, the concept is known as Professor Bitbol said, that the Aristotle, what made him to believe in some kind of, say, the agent there as the beginning point, or for Spinoza to come up with the autopilot concept, that some self-operation there to solve these problems. In Buddhism, the concept is the beginninglessness. There's no beginning. There's no beginning. Infinity in the past and infinity in the future. This is a Buddhist concept, and and people usually, even among the young Buddhists, the boys and girls in the Buddhist family who are introduced to modern education, they also come up with these questions. Oh, if there's no beginningless, I cannot understand it. So if there's no beginning, then it's so weird. So I said, okay. Is it weird to say that what you are today is because of tomorrow, because of yesterday? Is there issue? Is there a problem or not? We'll say that no problem. No problem. So you can identify any point back in time and identify that point. And if you ask that person, if you have a problem, that what is happening today is because of yesterday, the person will say there's no problem. What you will say, the same person will say in the past, in the history, that go back in time. So you can go ad infinitum. Infinite is not an issue. Say, for example, Charles Darwin's evolutionary theory. Charles Darwin's evolutionary theory. So we study modern education in a way. It's not really said that everything should have a beginning, but implicitly, the young minds, they were being in a way like indoctrinated in a very subtle way to believe that there should be some beginning there. For example, let's say Big Bang theory, Big Bang, the beginning of the universe, again, beginning. And then Professor Roger Penrose, Nobel laureate in physics. I think 2-3 years ago, he received a Nobel laureate. He became a Nobel laureate in physics. He did not believe in the single Big Bang. He said, even before Big Bang, there should be something there. Without this, something from nowhere, it cannot arise like this. So he did not really agree with. Within the physics, we see that there's a divergent view. In a way, Professor Roger Penrose, Nobel laureate in physics, what he's saying that he is accepting more the beginninglessness. And the Albert Einstein, he's more into the deterministic. Who believes in determinism, rather than the randomness, determinism. So therefore, he's against the many parts of the quantum mechanics, quantum physics. So he is more into determinism, saying that everything, whatever we see around, they should necessarily come into being by earlier causes. Earlier causes mean, again, you have to identify something. What's the cause of that? This is how the world operates. So we see that even among physicists, we see that there's a divergent view, and but they say many of the information that we get from modern physics, modern education, implicitly brainwashed us to believe in some, where things should have some beginning all the time. But the reality is that the beginninglessness, it makes total sense through this logic. Let me repeat it. Today, if I ask you, if you have any problem, would you agree with me that what is today is because of yesterday? If you say yes, you pick up any event in the past and tell the same person there, do you have any issue that you are the product of yesterday's thing? The person will say no. That is the proof of the beginninglessness. Thank you.
Thank you, Geshela. So it's almost the time of the end of our session. I actually have 2 more questions, one for each of you, but I don't want to go over. So what do you think, Michel? Shall I ask you one more question, or do you need to go now?
I think I need to go, but it can be a very short one.
It could be. So the question is, So Geshela explained that Buddhism has a goal, which is to experience happiness and free oneself from suffering. The question is, what is the goal of quantum physicists, and do they have any?
This is a very good and very difficult question. At the same time, I'm sure each physicist has his or her answer, but obviously, I think, in fact, the goal must be almost the same as the Buddhist goal. But usually we physicists don't really know that it is the case. At first, we dream of something, some ideal picture of the world. We dream to understand where we are, where we come from. And this is something very thrilling. At the same time, when we study a lot of physics, for instance, we discover that our hope was not necessarily sensical. It was not really meaningful. And we discover something else, which is probably even more interesting. For instance, we discover that there are limits to theoretical, discursive, verbal knowledge, and therefore that we must open ourselves to another dimension, such as the dimension that is taught by Buddhism, which is no longer a speculation, a theoretical speculation about the nature of the world, but which is also teaching about how to inhabit this world with maximized happiness and decreased suffering. So I think at the end of the day, the aim of the scientist and the aim of the Buddhist teacher are probably bound to converge at some point, and it's probably what we are witnessing now. And I was very happy to interact with Geshela once again, and thank him very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Michel. So we are going to let you go. We know that you really had to take on you to be able to attend and join. Thank you so much. And Geshela, I have one more question for you, or we can stop. It's really up to you.
Yeah, one more.
Okay, so it's Anna's question about the relation between emptiness and space. And she's asking if there is a relation between emptiness and space. For instance, some Buddhist texts say similar to space or dissolving in space. And then she quotes the Buddha saying, beyond utterance, thought, and expression is the perfection of wisdom, which is unborn and ceased and has the nature of space. I'm not going to read further, but she asked whether space is just a metaphor based on the fact that space is permanent, and therefore the perfection of wisdom is also permanent, or are there other interpretations?
Okay, this is a very important question, extremely important question. Therefore, the emptiness is something that we need to really study systematically. That what is space? Space, in the Buddhist context, say space, we get impressions so like there's something there, there's a space there. Are we going to the space? What is space? Space is just the absence of the tangibility, absence of the solidity, absence of some object there. There's a space, and our mind creates a sense of space there as something visual, something vast space. And so we talk about the what is that? The dark particle, the what? Dark energy, right? Which we don't see, as well, like the whole space. So the point is that the space, in the study of the Buddhist logic, the space should be understood in two ways. The one which is visually seen, which has the characteristics of the absence of the obstruction. Absence of obstruction. For example, if there's somebody right next to me, or the wall is next to me, I will not throw my hand very freely like this, because it can hurt me. But when I do that, I'm doing that with confidence that there's a space there. then there's nothing obstructing my hand. So absence of obstruction, that is what is known as space. The mere absence of the obstruction is the space. Likewise, what is emptiness? Emptiness is the mere absence of objectivity, a mere absence of intrinsicality. So our mind is so addicted to seeing things as not as mere absence of, for example, let's say this flower. This flower is the absence of chocolate, absence of being a house, and so forth. But when you look at it, we don't see this absence of flower, no absence of house, absence of chocolate, and so forth. We see this as a solid flower. This is how our mind is so, the addicted. Addicted. This is the chronic disease of our mind, to see things so solidified. And in true sense, this flower, although it's a flower, it has a quality of being absent of intrinsic reality. So that quality, absence of the intrinsic reality of the flower, just pick this quality and you have to meditate on this. So that is like the picking up the absence of the absence of the obstruction, which is labeled as the space. So just the space is the mere absence of the obstruction. Emptiness is the mere absence of the intrinsic reality. So this is where the metaphor kicks in. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you, and thank you everyone for participating, asking very interesting questions. I really had a great time, and I hope everyone had too. And I hope to see you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Arnold, and thank you, Professor Michel Bitbol. And we see that Venerable Geshela is working so hard to do the translation. Thank you so much. And thank you, Anna Sophie, and thank you, each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.